Hello and welcome to SAP Ariba Customer Self-Service videos. Today we're going to look at how can we set up a prerequisite question where we can restrict event response submission, which means how do we stop suppliers from submitting a response when they do not meet our prerequisites. When we run a tender, when we float a tender, there might be specific questions that we ask a supplier, or we might have specific requirements from a supplier. And if the supplier answers in the negative, we just cannot work with them. For example, we can ask the supplier if he's ISO certified. And if they're not ISO certified, we cannot work with them. It's a requirement of our project. Right? It can be any other requirement. So how do we specify this in an RFP where we can restrict a supplier response? Today, when we publish an RFP and we ask for these questions back, it's just a part of the questionnaire where we can get a yes or no, but that does not stop a supplier from sending back his response to us. So we get the response from the supplier. We look at all their responses and then figure out, oh, he's not ISO certified or he does not meet our requirement. We cannot work with him. But we've spent time in getting the response from that supplier. Also, we have wasted the supplier's time because he has submitted a response even though he cannot participate. And so there is a way we can handle this in the solution where we can set up a question as a prerequisite question and tell the system that this is a prerequisite question with control on response submission. Right? We have a restriction and that will control response submission. Right? Let's go into the application and see how this works. Here we are in an RFP that I've created, and I've kept a simple RFP which has 4 questions, 2 line items, including pricing. And I've kept one term which says, do you meet this requirement? It can be anything. I'm just going to call it this requirement. Let's edit this. And when we create this, so do I meet this requirement? It can be any question of yours. It can be an ISO question. It can be a question on revenue. It can be any question, right? And the next question that comes up here is this a prerequisite question to continue with the event? We have 3 options, yes and no restrictions, which means, yes, it is a prerequisite. I want to get this answered up front, but there's no restriction. So it doesn't matter what he answers, we let him submit his response. The second one is yes with an access gate on event content, which means I say if he says no, then I will not show him my content at all. He should not be able to see my content at all. And the third one is yes, restricting response submission, which means if he says no, I will still show him my content, but I will not let him submit any responses. So the supplier cannot fill up any responses. Right, today we're going to look at the third option, which is yes, restricting response submission. I'm going to set this as yes, restricting response submission. My answer type, I'm going to keep it as a simple yes, no, participant required, and that's all I need to do with it. And I say done. If he says yes, I let him submit an event response. If he says no, I will not let him submit any event response. Okay, let's go ahead and publish this event. Okay, now my event is published and you can see here it's giving me a little icon of a door, which means it's set up as a prerequisite question. Now let's log in as a supplier and see how this works. Okay, so I'm now logged in as a supplier. As a supplier too, I can see the little green door here. So I'm going to do a review prerequisites and it's going to ask me, do you meet this requirement? If I say no and I say okay, I don't meet this requirement, so I'm not, it could be ISO certification, I don't meet it. When I say no, the supplier can now see my content. So you can see my questions, you can see my line items that I'm asking for pricing, what's the quantity. But there's no way for me to submit a response. The only way for him to submit a response is he has to meet this requirement. So you can always go back. I'm going to say yes as a supplier. And now when I submit, so I'm telling them I do meet this requirement. Now it lets me go and submit my prices. for the two line items. So I say, okay, these are my two line items. Now I can see all of this. So I can say yes, no, my prices, and I can submit a response, right? And that's it. All right, now let's go back into our buyer screen. And I can now see the response that has come from the supplier. Right? In case a supplier has said no, I can see that here as well. Right? Let's go into another second supplier. Okay, so I'm now here in the screen of my second supplier. I'm going to say no. Say okay. I do not meet this requirement. Right? Let's go back into my buyer screen. Right? I'm now back in my buyer screen and I can very clearly see the supplier has said no. So I don't have any response from him. And supplier said yes. So that's how it works. So the challenge is we want to be able to control the responses we get from the suppliers and make sure they meet the mandatory requirements. So we set up a question as a prerequisite question, and from there we can control this. This is what I had to cover today. For any more details, do visit SAP Ariba Help. For any questions that you might have on this, please reach out to your SAP Ariba Customer Engagement Executive. Thank you.